Without further ado, we'll welcome our first featured novelist. Amber Elby was born in Grand Ledge, Michigan, but spent most of her childhood in the United Kingdom. She began writing when she was 3 years old and created miniature books by asking her family how to spell every single word. Several years later, she saw her first Shakespearean comedy, Much Ado About Nothing, in London. Many years later, she studied creative writing at Michigan State University's Honors College before earning her Master's of Fine Arts degree in Screenwriting at the University of Texas at Austin. She currently resides in Texas with her husband and 2 daughters and spends her time teaching, traveling, and getting lost in imaginary worlds. Please welcome Amber.
Thanks for coming out, and also thank you to Malvern for having me tonight, and thanks to KP also for sharing the night with me. There's also going to be a Q&A after all of the readings in which KP and I will answer your questions if you have any, so stay around for that too. I'm here to debut my novel. It is my debut novel, to be redundant. It's called Cauldron's Bubble, and it is essentially Shakespearean fan fiction. But it's made for adults and kids. Anyone who doesn't like Shakespeare will hopefully like this. Anyone who loves Shakespeare should love it as well. It's very much a tale that takes place in what I call the Shakespeare verse, which isn't verse like poetry, it's verse like the Marvel verse, like universe. So I imagine this place where Shakespeare's characters can interact with each other. They can cross the barriers of their plays, they can cross time and space, and meet each other in ways that obviously don't exist in the Elizabethan times when they're originally written. In addition to Shakespeare's characters, I also have new original characters who interact with them, so it does tell an original story. If you are looking for something to encourage young people who are reluctant to read Shakespeare to actually read Shakespeare, this is a really good bridge text. I used to teach at LASA, and I discovered that a lot of students came in unprepared to understand Shakespeare, to relate to his characters. And this hopefully allows young people to have a chance to get to know them before they're in the class reading his actual plays. I draw in this novel mostly from Macbeth, The Tempest, and Hamlet. Hamlet is a character in here, as are Prospero and Caliban and Miranda and some of the other characters you know from this. The witches from Macbeth are where the title comes from also. And that's where I'd like to actually begin my, my reading. It's from chapter 3, which is titled Through the Fog and Filthy Air. This particular section is about one of the dual protagonists. Her name is Alda. The other protagonist is named Dren. He does not appear in this section, but he is a cabin boy on a pirate ship who meets Hamlet in a previous chapter. So it's important to note, too, that this novel doesn't follow regular chronology. There's time travel, there's flashbacks, there are all of these things that I love to do when I write screenplays that don't necessarily work as easily in novels. So I juggled them, and we often see characters who will be doing something and then they'll remember a previous time in their life that actually applies. So this has one of those sections, and it also has witches, which is fun. Chapter 3, Through the Fog and Filthy Air. Alda was disoriented by the stinging on her face. She thought for a moment that she was drowning, her wet hair flapping in the wind, stifling her breath and blocking her eyes. Her ink-colored dress was quickly drenched by the freezing rain that hung on her arms and legs like moss on a rock. She knew where she was, despite never before seeing the place. A moor, the place her grandmother had sent her. She walked cautiously over the low hill on sponge-like soil, feeling her way in the murky darkness. At first, it was difficult to progress in this strange environment, but she persisted, even though she knew not where to go. A memory flashed into her mind. Alda, some years earlier, had found herself in another strange place. She was trapped in the top of an oak tree along the ledge path and screamed for her grandmother. The old woman ran from her cottage but stopped on the bridge, crossing her arms angrily as she scolded. "If you got up there, you can get down. That branch is in the way." Her grandmother smiled and recited a verse. "Strike it down that other boughs may flourish where that perished sapling used to be." "A poem, poetry will not help me." "Then help yourself, child." "I don't know how," Alda wailed, with tears forming in her eyes. "Nonsense. Climbing trees up or down is like anything else. Always hold on to something, and don't be afraid to fall." Her grandmother returned to the cottage, her feet angrily clomping across the bridge. And Alda did fall, her skirt tearing on the outstretched branch before she landed in a puddle below. But she had tried by herself, and after she wiped off the mud, she climbed another tree. Now on the moor, Alda looked for something to hold, even something immaterial. She needed a goal, hope. At last, over a small rise, she saw the red glow of a fire shining beneath a purple cloud, which hovered like a dome above a ring of standing stones. It took her a considerable time to cross the sticky heath, pulling her shoes carefully from the muck and dense shrubs with each step, avoiding rocks and sudden valleys eroded by hundreds of years of relentless rain. Finally, she was nearly upon the fire, standing just outside the stone circle. She froze at the sight before her, a nightmarish scene, and crouched behind a stone as she watched in disbelief. The fire rose high above the moor, even above the boulders encircling it. Around the flames sat 3 hunched figures, bending and shaking with each breath, their faces feminine but bearded, their eyes blank and sunken. They cackled and laughed at an apparent joke told by the shortest one that ended in the word runyon, which Alda did not fully hear or understand. Within the fire, twirling on a spit, was an unnaturally large charred bat, roasting on the flames. Surrounding all of these figures, the purple fog formed a dome that protected the interior of the henge from all the wind and rain that still pelted Alda. Alda stood in the darkness, watching the figures for what felt like hours, unsure what to do or where to go, wondering how she got there and why she was there. Then, as a suddenly strong gust pelted the hilltop, one of the hooded women sniffed the air, crinkled her nose, and stared directly at the rock protecting the trembling girl. The other 2 strange women followed the lead of the first, rising and circling the stone from opposite sides. "Where are you going, my sweet maid?" Alda turned her face from the figure, trembling, only to come face to face with the second. They dragged Alda into their protective fog out of the rain, forcing her nearer the tallest monolith in the center of the stone circle, poking their bony fingers in her dripping hair and soaked-through clothes. "Looking to find some trouble, eh? Or finding some trouble to see? Should we stretch her tongue for her to talk, sister? Loosen her teeth for it to wiggle? Let's give her a spell to see if it fits to a tittle, or give her some silence to let her talk a little." They stopped circling Alda as Alda gasped, almost gulped for air. She did not know what to say, where to begin, or how any of it would make sense to these creatures on the moor. She stammered only, "What?"